Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Okay, guys, so I want to learn more about the time between the Bronze Age collapse and, say, the start of Alexander the Great's conquest. And this is a major part of that. I think, classical Greece is the latter part of that period. And I guess through looking here, the period after, at least in Greek terms, the period after the Bronze Age collapse, like between the Bronze Age collapse and more classical Greece, I guess was termed the Age of Heroes, where you have like Heracles and Trojan War and stuff like that. And so that would be like, let's say modern day civilization collapses. Let's say there's like a nuclear war between Russia, China, and the USA, and we all, like us three, obliterate each other. And then there's some period in between where civilization is kind of collapsing and a lot of people died. And then eventually they get their footing. The period in between the nuclear war and getting their footing again, civilization in the future, would be like their equivalent of post Bronze Age collapse, Age of Heroes kind of thing. Is that fair? I don't think that's a crazy thing for me to say, right? Like, you know, so I don't know a lot about that period. I have been learning more, like going to bed. I haven't been reacting, but going to bed, I have been listening to these really great YouTube videos about like the Sumerians and then the Akkadians and the Babylonians and the Hittites and the Phoenicians and the ancient Egyptians. I like learning about this stuff. It's clearly more not as precise as more recent history for obvious reasons, but I still like to get a general idea of what's going on. We're starting with this video, okay? The tragedy of classical Greece. Preemptive like. Let's get started. Let's go.
When we talk about ancient Greece, so much of that is filtered through the...
All right. If you aren't ready to learn, listen. You're in the wrong class. Home ec is down the hall. I am zoned in. I'm ready to go. Let's do it.
When we talk about ancient Greece, so much of that is filtered through the lens of Athens. Democracy was invented by Athens. The Persian Empire tried to conquer Greece, but was defeated by Athens. They tried again, but were locked out for good by Sparta and Athens. The first empire to span the Aegean Sea was created by Athens. The biggest war in ancient Greek history was fought between Sparta and Athens. The arts of philosophy, theater, and oratory were cultivated and hit their peak in Athens. Diogenes peed in the street and...
Diogenes. I like this guy right here, with the leg up for a nice writing platform.
And oratory were cultivated and hit their peak in Athens. Diogenes peed in the street and spit
this freaking guy. I first learned about him in a Salmonella video.
On rich people in Athens. Not as important as the others, but you see the trend. The tale of classical Greece at the height of its glory and impact on world history is essentially delineated by here's when it's the Athens show. From the creation of democracy in 508 BC to the defeat and conquest of Athens and its allies in 338 by the upstart kingdom of Macedonia. In the 400s, Athens was the capital of an empire, and in the 300s, it was the capital of Greek culture. Athens has more than earned its time in the spotlight of history. But right now, I want to look everywhere else. Frankly, anywhere else. So, to understand classical Greece as more than the 170-year-long Athenian power hour, to instead zoom out and see the shape of the whole Greek world, let's do some history. Now, while Athens is off gallivanting into empire and infamy in the 400s BC, what are we looking at instead? Fantastic question. I'm so glad I wrote it that way. Allow me to reframe the story of the classical period. We typically think of it as the century and a half when Greece gets bigger, grander, the height of excellence, but we can also trace this period as the failure of the polis system. Since the 700s, the essential unit of Greek civilization was the city-state, the polis, that self-sufficient combination of an urban core and its surrounding farmland. For 3 centuries, precious few governments in Greece were bigger than a city, and they didn't need to be. But when Persia came around, the world got real big, real fast. In 546, the Achaemenid Persian Empire conquered the cities of the Ionian coast, and there was precisely nothing any of them could do about it. They bristled under Persian authority and made themselves tricky to govern, even launching an open revolt in the 490s, but neither they nor their allies across the Aegean had the means to stand up to them. The cities were just too small. Persia recognized that.
As much as I want to read the stuff down here, and some of it's funny and informative, I can't multitask like that. I I have to just focus on what he's saying.
And went over to want to stand up to them. The cities were just too small. Persia recognized this and went over to one of those distant revolt enablers to teach them what for. Except, shock and surprise, Persia got their asses handed to them because, oh, by the way, that was the Battle of Marathon. Just by the numbers, little old Athens should not have won that battle, so when it came time for round 2 a decade later, they needed more than some good battle tactics and another lucky break. Winning the Second Persian War and preventing Greece from getting squished into an imperial province took the combined effort of the most powerful...
Hold on. So it was 25,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry versus 10,000 hoplites. So this number, can we just kind of ignore this? Because would they have been fighting? I don't know much about Battle of Marathon, as you can tell.
Time for round 2 a decade later, they needed more than some good battle tactics and another lucky break. Winning the Second Persian War and preventing Greece from getting squished into an imperial province took the combined effort of the most powerful militaries in Greece working together, which they had to
enemy
that
of my
point
enemy.
never done on that scale. It's such a crucial chapter in Greek history because it was the first time they faced an existential threat. Sure, there's the danger of entire cities getting burned to the ground, which did indeed happen, but becoming subjects of Persia also meant overwriting the Greeks' identities as citizens of their polis. Even in victory against the Persians, that core danger would not go away forever, and any one city alone did not cut it. That's why so many cities were eager to ally with Athens or Sparta in a mutual defense league. In a world of big scary empires, try making one of your own.
See, the moment I try to read something right here, I lose it.
But becoming subjects of Persia also meant overwriting the Greeks' identities as citizens of their polis. Even in victory against the Persians, that core danger would not go away forever, and any one city alone did.
Okay. So banding together and fighting as one had the danger of erasing their individual identities. Okay.
Against the Persians, that core danger would not go away forever, and any one city alone did not cut it. That's why so many cities were eager to ally with Athens or Sparta in a mutual defense league. In a world of big scary empires, try making one of your own. Athens' Delian League campaigned against Persia on and off in the following decades, including a brief foray into Egypt, but for the next 50-ish years, Greece was safe from outside invasion. But this, of course, brings us to the problem. After Bluetown and Redsville over here carved up mainland Greece and the Aegean, the primary threat switched from Persia to each other. An empire way over the sea is nowhere near as scary as one you can see just across the bay, and each team was willing to put the maximum squeeze on the cities beneath them to protect against the other. That'll blow up in a minute, but even before then, it was a raw deal for the small cities whose territory, manpower, and wealth supported those big empires, because their dearly cherished autonomy got flattened anyway. In 471, the island of Naxos tried to ditch the Athenians, but when Athens forcibly brought them back in line, everyone realized, oh, cool. This isn't an alliance, this is a protection racket. Got it. Other cities would try their luck excusing themselves from the party, but neither imperial master was allowing any of it. When war inevitably did erupt...
I think this is a very good lesson for... I think this should be calculated into you joining an alliance to fight a larger threat in the Persians, okay? You should already take in, like, all right, what should I do? Should I go with the Greek powers fighting against Persia, or should I go with Persia? Because staying alone isn't an option. And you need to take in the fact that if you go with the Greek states and you win, they're going to take advantage of you in that state. They're going to, all right? And so you have to, I think you should take that in. If you thought that everything would just go back to normal after you defeated the Persians, I think that's kind of crazy. So, no surprise.
This is a protection racket. Got it. Other cities would try their luck excusing themselves from the party, but neither imperial master was allowing any of it. When war inevitably did erupt between Athens and Sparta, for the second time actually, it meant nearly 3 decades of conflict all across the Greek world. Now, Greeks were no stranger to killing and dying for their home polis, but the wars of centuries past were local and quick. This was a sustained, multi-decade slog with massive armies and navies all over Greece, fighting pitched battles and protracted sieges, all of which could only be supported by squeezing a vast amount of resources from allies and then burning it year after year after year on the war. While the immediate loser of this Peloponnesian War was Athens, everyone was worse off for it. Not just before and during the fighting, but long after the war as well. See, when Sparta finally bested Athens in 404 BC, it confiscated the Athenian Empire for itself and began collecting tribute from Athens' former subjects, sharing none of it with their long-suffering allies. Sparta promised an age of freedom, but what they actually did was monopolize imperial exploitation. Part of their strategy was to install military governors called Harmosts in conquered cities to prevent any of their subjects from taking an interest in that icky Athenian democracy. Yuck. Assuring their dominance by casually destroying the political fabric of Greece. The polis was no longer the essential unit of society or the vessel through which citizens expressed their identity, but an instrument of control for exploitative overlords. Far from returning to a comfy polis age equilibrium, the new normal after the Peloponnesian War was a game of hegemony. As we enter the 300s BC, one state alone was the biggest power in Greece. Notably, the exact outcome Greeks feared from Persia a century earlier and went to extreme.
You know, it's so crazy. I don't like when I imagine this, you know, Greece as, you know, a very powerful Greece, and I think about movies like 300 or Troy, or, well, Troy is about, those are like 1,000 years apart. Troy is about the Trojan Wars, right? But like when I think about ancient Greece, I think of it as many centuries prior to ancient Rome. But Rome is a thing right now as a republic, right? I wish I could sort of scroll a bit up, like north west here, just to see, like, have they destroyed the Etruscans yet? How much land do they have? What's Carthage doing? You know, it's not like Persia and Sparta and Greece, or Persia and Greece, are in a vacuum. Like, what are these guys doing? Like over here and down here and
lengths to avoid. But this new world order was not as rigidly monopolar as it appeared, because Sparta's dominance would prove extremely fragile. Unfortunately for the boys in red, Greece was about to play a rousing game of Deck the Leader, where old rivals put aside their differences to absolutely clobber whomever was currently on top. Round 1 began with Sparta's allies Thebes and Corinth furious to be cut out of the victory spoils and willing to ally with anyone to get revenge. Not just their old adversary Athens, but existential enemy number 1, Persia. See, the Persians were thrilled to finance Greece's interstate slap fights and keep the heat off themselves. No need to conquer the Greeks so long as they were constantly squabbling. So when Athens started doing a little too well in the war, no trouble at all. Persia just switched allegiances, backed Sparta, and forced peace negotiations, with everyone ending weaker than they started.
You know what's interesting but kind of depressing, is that the same concept has happened ever since and is happening now. There needs to be a term for two powers fighting against each other and the repercussion, two big powers fighting against each other and the repercussion on other powers, smaller powers around the world, whether they're allies or not. Maybe worse if they're allies. But I think of, like, you know, the USA and the Soviet Union, for example. It's like, I don't think that the USA and Soviet Union were keen on expanding their ideology on just some, like, they did it out of fear that if I don't get you on my team, then you're inevitably going to be on their team. And so whether or not I think you should have freedom or self determinism, you should be able to determine by yourself your course as a country. Well, I still don't want to lose to that guy, and I don't want you to join them, so I'm going to attack you. And then also, this is classic of just funding whatever side in an area has two opposing factions, especially if it's in an area that you have intentions on in the future, so that they can weaken each other, and then you could come in and reap the rewards afterwards. So I'm trying to say that this warfare might have changed, but politics and the reasons that countries go to war or not seem like they stayed the exact same.
That's an absolute win, and that's simple yet everyone ending weaker than they started. In Persia's book, that's an absolute win, and that simple yet oh so effective playbook would continue working across the next 3 decades. Round 2 kicked off in 378 with 2 separate flashpoints. First was Athens recreating the Delian League by inviting its current and former allies back into the team, and second was Thebes successfully ousting the Spartan Harmost and his garrison from their city. Later that decade in 371, Thebes accomplished the unthinkable by beating Sparta in a hoplite battle and then muscling into Sparta's own turf to put them in baby baby jail. Thebes liberated Sparta's enslaved population of Helots and gave them a city in their home region of Messenia, cleanly depriving the Spartans of their main source of agriculture and saddling them with a fiercely hostile city right next door. Several actually, as Thebes also organized an Arcadian league in the central Peloponnese to keep Sparta thoroughly boxed in from the north as well. That's an impressive turnaround, but Thebes is looking pretty powerful right about now. Pretty threatening, I might say, if I were an Athenian. So, of course, round 3, Athens and Sparta versus Thebes, meeting at the Battle of Mantinea.
This is why I'm always careful to judge anyone in history off of what good or bad they did, or I guess what bad, because everyone who doesn't have the power accuses them of doing something wrong, but it seems like anyone who then gets into power afterwards becomes a hypocrite and does the same thing. And it's easy to call out the bad guy when you're the one on the wrong foot, but as soon as you get the upper hand, oh, would you look? You're acting the exact same. And I'm not saying all powers are equally brutal in how they subjugate people or how they wield power, but they're all more similar than I think they're similar.
Which was the round 3, Athens and Sparta versus Thebes, meeting at the Battle of Mantinea, which was the largest hoplite fight in Greek history and a rare double knockout, with Thebes losing its star general Epaminondas and Sparta losing most of its army. So here in 362, all sides were utterly exhausted. No new hegemon could take Thebes' place, and by the time there was one, this cycle would just repeat all over again, to the supreme delight of the Persians.
Exactly.
From that perspective, this cycle seems endless, and the classical era overall looks to be a pretty dire stretch for those poor self-sabotaging Greeks. Don't worry, it was, but it's more than just a bad time. This era sees the step-by-step, agonizing obsolescence of the city-state, the force that organized and defined ancient Greek civilization up to this point. That's the tragedy hidden just beneath the Athenian golden age of the 400s, and that offers some key context for what comes next. 3 years after Mantinea, Philip the up to this point. That's the state, the force that organized and defined ancient Greek civilization up to this point. That's the tragedy hidden just beneath the Athenian golden age of the 400s, and that offers some key context for what comes next. 3 years after Mantinea, Philip II becomes king of Macedon and enjoys the luxury of conquering Greece at its absolute weakest. Still impressive, certainly, but far less of a surprise. That's one read on the situation, but there is another. This whole process started when the world around Greece got bigger. Persia was a big threat. So
it's crazy how everything went right for Persia in the weakening of their enemies in Greece. And yet still, Alexander the Great was born out of Philip Macedon's conquests from a weakened Greece. And then he went on to destroy Persia. It's a lose-lose.
The Greeks created something bigger than the polis to meet it. Ouch times ensued, but by the death of Philip in 336, Greece for the first time found itself in the shape of an empire, a shape it would retain for 1,500 years. The tragedy of the classical period is Greeks trying to preserve their civic way of life, yet diving headlong into its undoing, so their culture had outlived their society, but the irony of the era is that culture actually outgrew society. See, the golden age of Athens in the 400s was plenty spiffy, but the 300s arguably outshine it, taking what Athens started, expanding on it, and spreading it so these accomplishments would last beyond the fortunes of whichever city was playing hegemon for a decade. This century is where we see the founding of entire schools of philosophy, the proliferation of history as a genre by Thucydides and Xenophon, the empirical study of political science, oratory as an art form in the speeches of Demosthenes, formalized medicine from Hippocrates, new comedy in the plays of Menander, plus plenty more pottery, sculpture, and architecture all across Greece.
So what allowed for that boom in the creation of a lot of like modern day professions or modern day, you know what I mean? The blow up in education, this stuff. Okay. I can't think of the word. Was it the fact that it was a democracy before this? I mean, this isn't the only area in the world that had constant conflict. So why Greece? Why was it able to create all of these things that we see as the start of a lot of practices that we have today.
Hippocrates, new comedy in the plays of Menander, plus plenty more pottery, sculpture, and architecture all across Greece. In the 300s BC, Hellenic culture was accelerating, so when the Macedonian Empire shows up and Alexander the Land Expander does his thing, Hellenism adapts seamlessly to the new shape and scope of the Greek world. I don't think it would have gone that smoothly if the polis were still as strong an institution and an identity as it was before. The atrophy of the polis left an undeniable void, but that posed an opportunity for a new kind of Hellenism to take its place. In this case, a bigger kind. So where does all that leave us? The classical period was a fleeting triumph for Athens and Sparta, a lasting tragedy for the polis, and a triumph in waiting for the Greek world that would follow. I'm not getting emotional, I just have an abiding love of civics. And clearly a lot to process. Did you ever hear the tragedy of classical Greece the Wise?
Who is Darth Plagueis? Who? Sifo-Dyas, who the hell is that? Qui-Gon, I don't know. I don't know a lot of Star Wars. I like Star Wars. I just don't know a lot of things outside of the movies. So, very interesting, fantastic video. But it seems like the tragic end of a lot of things seem to be necessary destruction for the slingshotting of much greater stuff. Like, it seems like the Bronze Age collapse was probably a good thing to happen. Maybe these restarts in civilization, well, I'm sure large percentage of populations perished. That's not great if you're living during the time. Or in the few centuries afterwards when, in like the Dark Ages, you know. What I'm trying to say, sometimes a reset is needed for more expansion. Does that make sense? Love you all. Hope you guys are all doing well. Fantastic video. Would appreciate any answers, any questions I had, any comments at all down below. And I hope you guys are all doing well. I really do. All right, chin up. If not, you'll be good soon. Emotions are fickle. See you guys next time. Bye.